What if Naruto was a king in DxD Final Part Journey of a King? Start the trio of Naruto, Yusaka and Kuno who was being carried made their way through the crowded stadium in order to reach their seats. It was finally time for the first chunin exams finals since the war had started. People all over the nations had flocked towards Konoha in order to get a glance of what some called a new generation of shinobi. Kids, or adults depending on one's viewpoint, to show the world what they could and had to offer. To show other people, whether they be merchant, nobles or just regular civilians, that they were the best for any task one had. To hire them above the rest for jobs they themselves could not accomplish. Sitting down with Kuno in between himself and Yusaka, he thought back to the past few days and the events that had transpired. The first thing was the situation regarding his feelings when it came to his parents. Honestly, even though he still wasn't sure what to do or how he felt when they were brought up. He had heard Yusaka's words that afternoon. She even had tried to get him to talk about them later when they were in their hotel room that evening. Yet, despite her attempts, he just couldn't feel anything other than indifference. A feeling she knew was false. It was why he spends so much time with Kuno and her. To remove those painful memories and replace them with pleasant ones of them. His mind had repressed his feeling about his parents to such a point would perhaps take months if not years to get a proper reaction. However, Yusaka had suggested another way for him to feel anything towards them was for him to come face to face with them and have a proper conversation, but it was close to impossible with two conflicted thoughts fighting in his mind. So ultimately he ended up avoiding them, Yusaka rejecting the invitation his mother had sent her much to his appreciation. The rest of the time here was spent just walking around with his family, showing them certain areas he used to spend a lot of hours at when he was just a child. Aside from that, he had hung out with Gaara just having small conversations about how life was going on. He had noticed, however, that the other cages had arrived as well as he could sense Gyuki was in the village. He was surprised yet also glad that it seemed like either B had no interest in him or the eight-tailed Biju had not informed him that he was here, as there would come nothing good out of it if the cages were to discover he was currently in Konoha. There was just one annoying event that had occurred when they had ran into Kiba, who much to his surprise but not really had not changed whatsoever. He was still loud and way too annoying, much like his younger self. The Inuzuka had been bothering Yusaka the moment he had laid his eyes on her with either flirtatious remarks or random question about why she smelled so much like foxes. Unfortunate for him though, despite her pregnancy, Yusaka was still leagues ahead of him when it came to power and had knocked him out in the middle of Konoha, much to his embarrassment when he woke up later with no memories of what had happened. "Are you okay?" Yusaka's question caused him to turn around and face her with an eyebrow raised. "Yes, why? Oh, nothing. You just seemed so out of it." He chuckled before his gaze went upwards to the sky. Despite it being close to noon, the moon was still up in the sky. While that was nothing too special, the fact that it was much bigger than it was those days ago when he spoke with Gaara was somewhat worrying, since it seemed it was going to clash with the planet, as weird as it sounded. Not to mention that with his enhanced eyesight he could see several smaller dots making their way towards Earth, or at least it appeared so. Shrugging, he moved his attention down to the arena where genin from different villages could be seen standing. If anything were to happen, he could get out of here quickly to bring both his wife and daughter to safety. It was somewhat amusing for Naruto to see each of these genin, 12 or 13 years old, smiling without a care in the world. Not knowing that when this event was over half of them would either end up crippled or dead. He sighed, to be young and careless again. Unknowing of the dangers that lurked in the world, but he couldn't really fault them for that, could he? After all, he was the exact same when he was their age. Despite having encountered several shinobi that could end the average Junin, he himself never acted like a shinobi was supposed to. Though he doubted there were many, if any, people his age who had to deal with the amount of shit he had. Fighting a terrorist organization composed from some of the toughest of shinobi for something he had no choice in. Fighting a war before he was an actual adult, not the title adult one could call themselves when wearing a headband. Despite it having made him into the person he was now, he wouldn't wish it upon anyone else, as children should be able to enjoy their childhood without worrying that it could end the next day. It was one of the reasons he made sure Kuno always was close to either himself or Yusaka, and when they themselves couldn't do it, a clone of them should at least be there. Just to protect her from the cruel reality how the world worked. Which was quite stupid, he had been told, but he didn't care. Their opinions didn't matter to him, since they were just that, opinions of people who think they know more than you do, but in reality it's much different. A pair of honey-brown colored eyes were focused on the trio of blondes that were seated in the audience, along with the rest of the people who came to watch the first chunin exams in over 2 years. It wasn't hard to find them between everyone who was there. They stood out a lot, both with their clothes and their looks that were so different from the more dark-haired civilians, which there were simply too much of. This is the first time she had seen him since the end of the war and was surprised that he looked almost the same. Even from where she was at, he looked only slightly older, more mature to the slightly childish look he held last time. Blonde hair which was slicked back and blood-red eyes which shone with visible warmth she had not seen before as he laughed at something the young blonde his child had said. If she wasn't able to sense his power, which she noted was suppressed almost perfectly, and if had Jiraiya not told her that he was here, she would most likely never know, as they looked like a perfectly normal-looking family who were here on a visit. Letting her eyes wander, Tsunade found the familiar shade of red belonging to Kushina not too far from the position Naruto was at. A part of her wanted to scream at the redhead. Scream that her son, the person she along with the rest have been looking for so long, was less than a couple dozen feet away. But she couldn't. She glanced sideways to the foreign cages who were seated. She would embarrass both herself, the daimyo who had come to see, and possibly start a fight that would claim hundreds of innocent guests who would likely end up killed in the crossfire of a fight between 5 cages and several dozen chunin against a single man. The worst part of it, she was sure they would not end up as the victors, as she once more glanced at one of the 2 men that could take over the elemental nations without anyone capable of stopping them. She flinched slightly, unnoticed by anyone but him, as their eyes met, a small smirk gracing his face as he took note of her reaction. He didn't do anything else, however, as his attention went back to the 2 blondes next to him. "Is there something wrong, Hokage Dono?" The voice of the cage seated next to her reached her ears. She turned her head, her eyes lingering on Naruto for just a bit more before making eye contact with Gaara. "No, just thought I recognized someone." Gaara nodded slightly before looking to where her gaze was just a moment ago and noticing 3 familiar blondes he had gotten acquainted with. "Seems it's about to begin." Tsunade's words caused him to avert his attention down to the arena where the genin, with the exception of the 2 who had the first fight, walked to the waiting area. "Kimiko Hyuga, Kajago Seika, are both of you ready?" the proctor asked both genin. One from Konohagakure and the other one from Kirigakure. "Hi," both genin said as they sized each other up. "Very well. If both of you are ready, I declare the first round of the chunin exams to begin." The proctor jumped back, allowing the genin to have the arena to themselves. "Fast," Yusaka commented as the boy seemed to have vanished before their eyes, only to reappear behind the Hyuga girl. While civilians most likely were unable to see the boy move, Yusaka was easily able to keep up, though it didn't mean she wasn't impressed, however, as it was still much faster than any 12-year-old she had ever seen move. The Hyuga girl quickly turned around, smacking away the fist that was heading her way before jumping back to allow some distance between them. From where he was at, Naruto was able to see the smirk the boy wore as he held a specific hand seal. Sweden. Gunshot. His cheeks bulged before he shot out a concentrated blast of water which was heading towards the Hyuga girl at impressive speeds. If the girl was concerned, she didn't show it as she easily ducked underneath it before she ran towards him. 8 trigrams. 32 palms. The girl exclaimed before her hands blurred and she began an onslaught of small taps to his tenketsu. Caught off guard by her sudden action, he was unable to block a single poke before being thrown back as she finished her attack. "Give up. I closed your tenketsu points. You can no longer mold chakra," Kimiko called out to the downed boy who glared at her. He tried using chakra only to see that she was indeed correct. Gritting his teeth, he looked towards the proctor. "I forfeit," he called out after realizing that without chakra he stood no chance, as he needed it in order to use his speed. The proctor jumped back down. "Kajago Seika has forfeited the match. The winner is Kimiko Hyuga of Konohagakure." "Naruto-kun," Yusaka called his name above the ongoing cheers and applause. What did she meant when she said she had closed his tenketsu points? That girl is a Hyuga, a clan that's known for their Byakugan, which is a bloodline limit which gives them those eyes you saw her have. It gives them X-ray vision and increased viewing distance. It has some more abilities, but that's not important. Anyway, everyone in this world has a chakra network which consists of 361 nodes which are called tenketsu. The Hyuga, with their eyes and special way of fighting, are able to close and see them by injecting their own chakra into them, causing the person who is hit to be unable to mold chakra in any way, shape or form. If all tenketsu are closed, it said the user would die, but no one had actually confirmed, so I dunno. "Interesting," Yusaka murmured as she listened to him explain. "How do you fight against them?" "Well, as you saw, to close one's tenketsu they need to be close by, so you preferably want to keep a safe distance between yourself and them before assaulting them with long-range attacks. Another way is to simply have too much chakra and force closed tenketsu open. It hurts a bit but will get rid of the effect. Aside from that is to not have a chakra network like you have. Kuno-chan here." He patted the head of their daughter who was now sitting in his lap. does have a chakra network due to me having one, or else she would be unable to form those chains of hers. Luckily though, as she gets older she will have more than enough chakra to get rid of their techniques, which I'll teach her when she gets older and has the required amount of chakra to do so. Suddenly, the feeling of a pair of hungry eyes staring at his form caused him to shiver lightly before looking into the direction he felt the stare was coming from. He quickly regretted his choice, however, as he stared straight into a pair of lavender eyes which seemed to stare at him with something akin to insanity mixed with obsession. It made him feel uncomfortable as the eyes were transfixed on his person. "I know who you are, Naruto-kun. My Naruto-kun," she mouthed towards him, insanity twinkling in her eyes. Damn, what happened to her? Naruto questioned himself as he did his best to ignore her. Her chakra spiked slightly as Hinata noticed he ignored her in favor of playing with the blonde child in his laps. Wait a minute. Her brain worked overtime as she looked at the young girl, then to Naruto, back to the girl once more before looking at the blonde woman who was sitting next to him. One could literally see the gears spinning in her head, the dots connecting one by one as her eye began to twitch violently. Killing intent began to leak off of her in waves. It started off slow but soon began to grow bigger and bigger, getting the attention from several shinobi and civilians who were sitting in the audience. Kuno buried her face in her father's chest, her body trembling from the feeling of death that washed over her. Noticing his daughter's distress, he sent a burst of concentrated killing intent of his own at the Hyuga heiress. She froze as his much more potent ki washed over the arena and reduced her into a trembling mess, eyes wide in shock and fear as she had seen herself die in dozens of possibilities. She wasn't the only one affected, as the spike of ki could be felt by anyone throughout the stadium, be they civilian or cage, though they weren't able to pinpoint who it was. Down below in the arena, the two genin had been affected as well. The split second it had happened was enough for one of them to lose concentration, allowing the other genin to slam his kunai in between the boy's ribs, much to both their shocks, having expected the other one to dodge. "Something wrong?" Yusaka asked, concerned as she too had felt his aura wash over her. "Yes, just someone was scaring Kuno, so I had to put a stop to it." The young blonde in his lap smiled contentedly as she felt safe in his arms. "Huh, that's strange." Naruto mused as he looked up. Gone was the blue sky, and in its place were nothing but clouds for as far as his eyes could see. It shouldn't be possible for the weather to change this quickly. The fact that he could feel something was off, like a sixth sense of sorts warning him that something was going to happen, put him on unease. Looking at Yusaka, he saw that she too felt it, the eerie feeling that reigned over the arena or the entire village in general. Then it happened. Explosions rocked the village, accompanied by tremors that could be felt by everyone. The clouds parted as rocks the size of several houses rained down upon them. Smoke could be seen rising up into the sky even from where they were seated from several directions around them. Screams of fear could be heard all around them as civilians panicked as they were under fire from an unknown assailant. Up where the cages were, they all shot up from their seats. "What is going on?" the wreckage yelled as dozens of meteorites continued to rain down upon the village. "I don't know," Tsunade answered the man before her eyes landed on Naruto, thinking he was responsible for this, only to see him staring at the sky with narrowed eyes like he was expecting something. Anbu. Several masked shinobi appeared before her. "Alert the everyone below Junin to escort the civilians get to shelter. I want every available Junin to look through the village for any wounded." She commanded them. The Anbu gave a nod before they were gone. "We need to go now," Naruto said to Yusaka as he stood up, trying to leave the arena before it was too late. As they attempted to leave, flashes of yellow appeared all around them. No doubt his father was getting the older population to shelter. "Naruto-kun, what is going on?" Yusaka asked as she increased her pace before looking up as small meteorite flew overhead before crashing into the ground behind the arena. "I'm not sure, except from the obvious attack that is happening. We have to leave though, or else we'll be too late." "Too late for what?" Her question was answered as the sky parted. Another meteorite coming down, except this one was bigger. Much bigger, as it shadowed the entire stadium and a large portion of the village in darkness. The people, both civilian and shinobi, stopped running as they watched the massive superheated rock coming closer and closer. Flashbacks ran through the heads of those who had battled in the last war when Madara had called down meteorites much like this one. Only this time they were unable to do anything, as previously Gaara had helped by using massive amounts of sand to stop it in its path. The problem this time? They weren't in a desert. Onoki couldn't do the same either, as unlike with Madara, this meteorite was glowing with heat, one which could be felt even from this distance as sweat ran down their foreheads. Yusaka realized that everyone inside the arena was going to die, as no one seemed able to stop the large rock from falling. Looking at Naruto, she frowned as he seemed unconcerned with the idea of tens of thousands of people dying as he continued to make his way to the exit. This was not the Naruto she loved. While he had informed her that he hated the shinobi world or system, there were thousands of innocents who had nothing to do with it. Naruto halted in his steps as he felt a firm grip on his shoulder. Turning around, he met Yusaka, who looked at him in disappointment, a look that hurt him more than he thought it would have.
Yusaka? He asked while glancing in the direction of the exit. Are you really willing to let all these people die, Naruto-kun? She looked deep into his eyes as she spoke. I know you hate shinobi, but most of them here are innocents.
I know this isn't you. You keep suppressing your emotions. What will you do if you will no longer feel anything, if the same happens like it did with your parents? If you no longer feel love for either me or Kuno? She saw him flinch at her example. I don't think I would be able to love you if you were without emotion. It would be like speaking to a robot. So please, she stepped closer to him. Please save them. Do it for me, Kuno, and yourself.
They stared at one another before she noticed a single tear running down his cheek as he held a soft smile. She gave him a vibrant smile as he allowed her to take Kuno from his arms before taking a few steps back. The air distorted next to him and he put his hand inside before pulling out a sword. It looked like a straight, double-edged blade, an European longsword to be more specific, with a golden cruciform hilt. Gram, the legendary sword of the sun, which according to legends was wielded Sigurd, pulled from the trunk of the mighty tree, Barnstalker, by Sigurd's father, Sigmund.
Not to be confused with the demonic version of the sword, which was made from reforged parts of this sword after shattering from clashing against Gingnir, which later became renowned as a demonic sword of glory and ruin. Naruto blinked at the influx of information the moment he held the weapon in his hands, as it gave him an idea what the weapon was capable of. Yusaka wasn't sure what the weapon he was holding was called, aside from the fact that she could feel the massive amount of holy energy the weapon radiated, which made even herself wary, as it would likely able to harm low-class devils from just standing nearby. She watched as he casually swiped diagonally before lowering the blade.
Before she could ask him what he just did, a gasp alerted her as she saw everyone look up. The meteorite had seemingly stopped in midair, going against the laws of gravity as it just hovered there. Then, it happened. It was small. A cut that was barely visible to even her began to glow brightly. The light continued to travel over the body of rock before completely encasing it, making it appear as a miniature sun from the brightness it held. As they looked in amazement at the glowing rock, it exploded without a warning in a massive explosion which could be felt throughout the entire land of fire. It left no signs of the enormous rock behind as golden particles rained down on the village like snow. As the people slowly snapped out of their shock and surprise, their eyes began to gaze around, looking for the person who saved them from what would have been certain death and destruction of the village.
In Naruto, Sochi, it was soft yet heard by all throughout the arena as Kushina stared at her son for the first time since the last war. Her hands trembled as his red eyes landed on her, eyes wide open as she gazed at him. She didn't even look away as the familiar flash of yellow alerted them of Minato's arrival, who, much like her, could only look solemnly at his son, his blue eyes filled with regret.
They weren't the only ones though, as everyone who recognized from former friends to cages from the other villages had focused their attention on him. That's Naruto? Ino exclaimed in shock as she could be seen standing next to her friends with the exception of Hinata. How troublesome, wonder what he's here for. While he looked uninterested, Shikamaru was quite the opposite as his brain ran through several ideas for the cause. Wait a minute, isn't she? Ino said to Sakura as they both watched a familiar blonde woman walk up to Naruto, who allowed the sword in his hands to disappear before taking the young girl from her hands. Sakura nodded her head as the blonde they had met kissed Naruto on the cheek, much to everyone's surprise. They're close. Aha. Very close. Ino then looked at the small blonde in his arms and slowly her eyes widened. Do you think what I'm thinking? Both Sakura and Shikamaru nodded as they figured out his relation with both the woman and young girl.
Likewise, Kushina was also in shock as she watched the same blonde woman who she had met in the hot springs and had a nice conversation with walk up to her son and kiss him. The same with the young girl her son was affectionately holding in a protective manner.
This woman, Yusaka, was her son's wife. She had met her son's wife without even knowing it. Wait. Kushina looked at Yusaka's pregnant stomach, to the girl in Naruto's arms, and then to both older blondes, and allowed a gasp to escape her lips. Kushina, what's wrong? Minato asked his wife, concerned as he wrapped an arm around her.
Minato-kun, her voice was quivering. We are grandparents, Dadbane. Her voice rose into excitement as she stared at Kuno, who after a moment of eye contact looked away uncomfortably by her stare, which seemed to gaze into her soul.
What? Minato managed to say before noticing that they indeed looked like a small family. Realization struck Kushina, however, as she had basically missed 6 years of her granddaughter's life. Though she wasn't aware she was one in the first place, so she was unsure as how she should feel. "2-san, who are they?" Yasaka looked at him, curious as to how he was going to answer. "Well, Kuno, they are your grandparents, I guess, my mother and father." The younger girl looked at both redhead and blonde with her head tilted and eyebrows furrowed. Kushina had to stop herself from squealing and running over there to wrap her in a hug. Sofu. Kushina and Minato nodded with big smiles on their faces at the girl, completely ignoring the fact that parts of Konoha were going up in flames. Kuno then looked at the blonde girl standing near them. "And who is that 2-san?" Kuno asked Naruto. "She is your aunt. I guess. My younger sister." He felt Yasaka move closer to both himself and Kuno to comfort him. Nami didn't react as her brother introduced her, still not over the shock that he had a family of his own already with the woman next to him. Several pairs of footsteps landed near them, each belonging to the 5 cages. Had he been anyone else, he might have been nervous under the stairs belonging to this world's strongest. But he was not. He was Uzumaki Naruto, the person who was capable of making the impossible possible and had enough power to wipe the 5 great villages of the map should he wish to do so. "Long time no see." Naruto greeted them causally, much to their apparent annoyance how he wasn't seeing them as a threat. "Are you this confident in yourself, boy?" the Tsuchikage said as he was floating in the air while scowling. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "I don't see why I shouldn't. I don't see any threats nearby, so meh." He shrugged his shoulders, further getting on their nerves, only to yelp in pain as Yasaka pinched his cheek. Naruto-kun, you really need to behave yourself or we're going to have problems." She shook her head at him as he cowered away from her while using Kuno as a shield. "Please no," he muttered weakly. "Think of the children. Imagine poor Kuno being exposed to the horror. Not to mention that you shouldn't overexert yourself." He looked at her belly. The cages, Minato, Kushina, his sister, pretty much everyone looked astonished at the reaction the blonde woman got out of him. His aura of confidence and power was shattered by a couple words. Though it shouldn't be surprising, as this woman was able to tame Naruto by herself. "Who is she, Naruto?" A familiar sounding voice spoke up as he looked to his right and saw his old friends walking up to them as well. Kiba, the person who asked the question, leered at Yasaka. "This is my wife, Yasaka, and our daughter Kuno," he introduced with a warm smile. "You're married?" Kushina yelled out in shock while holding back tears that threatened to fall due to having missed another important event in her son's life. "Yes, I am." He held up his in her hand to show them the ring he wore. "So stop looking at my wife like that or she'll do the same thing she did before, if you remember, that is." He smirked. "That was her." Kiba pointed accusingly at the woman, who shrugged. The woman who was responsible for his short memory loss, which was more annoying if anything. "Yes, you did it to yourself, however, and we're lucky I wasn't there when it happened, or we probably wouldn't have had this conversation." Kiba gulped at his words, understanding what he was implying. "I would have killed you if I had seen it happen." His implications weren't lost on the rest, as some sent disbelieving looks at how casually he said it. He would have killed somebody. "Ahaha, I was just joking back then." He chuckled nervously before furrowing his eyebrows and sniffing a few times before sending them a confusing look. "Why does your wife smell like a fox?" The rest of them looked at them with curiosity after hearing Kiba speak. Yasaka looked at her husband, wondering if she should reveal it to them or not. Naruto thought about it before sighing and nodded at her, whereas he himself whispered something to Kuno. The air around them shifted slightly before everyone's eyes and mouth widened as 9 blonde, bushy tails shimmered into existence behind Yasaka, with similar but smaller ones behind Kuno. Golden blonde-colored fox ears peeked out between their hair as they revealed their yukai features to them all. "So cute," was the general thought of several women who looked at Kuno with hearts in their eyes, who appeared even cuter with her tail swaying lazily behind her. The men, on the other hand, had to stop themselves from ogling at Yasaka, who, with how her tails were slightly floating in the air behind her, giving her an even more exotic than she did before, when some already had trouble not looking at her. "Damn," some grumbling could be heard as they stared at Naruto in jealousy. Especially those he used to be friends with, since they, with the exception of Shikamaru, were still single. 7, 8 and 9 tails. Kushina counted before blinking. "A Kyuubi?" She looked at him for answers while others got out of their shock. Even Gaara and his siblings were surprised, not having expected something like this. "Is she a demon?" she couldn't help but ask. Naruto laughed mockingly at that and their ignorance. "A demon? Ha ha ha, no she is not.
She's a yokai, which are humans with animal features, with kyubis just being the strongest ones, much like bijus, except unlike them they're not giant chakra constructs. They looked at Yasaka, who nodded in confirmation. My husband is correct. I am the current strongest of my species. Even now in my current state I'm more than capable to raise this village to the ground if I wished to do so. A few shinobi shifted in slightly more guarded positions as they heard that, while also taking note that Naruto seemed interested in strong women. Then why don't you? Tsunade asked the blonde vixen. Why should I? I only came here to see where my husband grew up, which reminds me a lot where we currently live, if not for the more technical advances we have where we are from. Not to mention that I don't like transforming into a giant fox as it diminishes my beauty. The latter was mumbled softly yet still heard by everyone present as they imagined how she would look like and if it was similar to how the biju looked like. If that's all me and my family like to go home, it seems you have a lot of trouble to deal with. To show what he meant he swiped his hand from left to right, and in a show of his power above them the clouds that had come back dispersed, revealing the moon, which seemed like it was going to crash into their planet any day now. How? Minato spoke up as he watched the moon, which appeared to be several times bigger than it did usually. A thought that was mimicked by everyone else there. Naruto shrugged. Not sure. I felt something was wrong when I first arrived back here but didn't think much of it. Now however, his eyes flashed between golden and red. I can sense an enormous amount of chakra there which feels somewhat similar to my own, he revealed. Can't you help us? Kushina looked at him with hope in her eyes. Naruto looked amused. Help you? Why would I do that? I only saved you because Yasaka wanted me to. This is honestly your own problem, as I've told you before. I'm finished with shinobi and their affairs. Not only that, but Yasaka has to return soon as we need to keep the ley lines in check, while also checking up on Kuroka in hopes that she didn't blow up our home. He deadpanned in afterthought of what the black-haired Nekosho would do. So is that it? Are you going to leave us after finally seeing you? His mother asked. You're not even going to let us get to know our granddaughter or your wife? Look, he sighed. My days as shinobi are over. Your interests are not mine, as I find this way of living barbaric, letting kids barely over 12 fight for their lives while not having a proper childhood. He shook his head. If you would do that where we live you'd be arrested immediately, as child soldiers are strictly forbidden. I want Kuno to have a normal childhood, which I did not have. To let her be a child and not remove that innocence which she holds. That is not something that can happen here, as there's no way she would go a week without seeing someone killed in front of her eyes. And if that were to happen I would be very displeased and might accidentally fire a bijudama in the direction of a certain village, and we don't want that, do we? Then there's the deal with you two. He pointed at Minato and Kushina. Honestly, I'm not even sure where to begin when it comes to you. My mind is unconsciously suppressing my real feeling about you, so there's no point to talking, as right now I feel nothing, which is apparently untrue. Even with help from Yasaka I have no idea how long it will take before I will be able to talk properly with either of you, as my mind just goes blank. There is no joy or hate and I don't like it. You know, if it was up to me I would probably keep the information that I was here unknown, but someone decided that would not help. He glanced at Yasaka, who innocently looked the other way. So you should be happy to see me and know that I have an adorable daughter with another one coming soon. He smiled a true smile as he looked at her stomach where life was forming. Everyone there could feel the happiness that he was radiating. So you should be happy knowing that I no longer have the urge to erase both of you from existence like I did when I first discovered you were alive. He felt Yasaka bop him on the back of his head and rolled his eyes. Perhaps if you ever find out how to reach me we can have a proper conversation, but meh, who knows when or if that will happen. With that the three blondes turned around before heading towards the exit. Nobody attempting to stop them, as they knew it would be useless to even try. Stop right there, or at least they thought, as a haughty, feminine voice spoke up. Naruto groaned as his fingers twitched dangerously while Yasaka looked confused at the girl that was walking towards them. She had long dark blue hair in a hime-cut, pale skin accompanied by pale lavender eyes, which Naruto had told her belonged to members of the Hyuga clan. Her attire consisted of a purple sleeveless kimono-style blouse held together by a dark obi and navy-colored shorts. Yasaka had to admit that she was quite beautiful even when compared to some supernatural in their world, but was confident in her own beauty and noted that Naruto didn't leer at her. If anything, he seemed to be looking at her with annoyance more than anything. What do you want, Hinata? I'm sure I made it clear I want nothing to do with you. He glared at the girl, who just smiled in return. You did say that. But you said you didn't want me because I was weak. Hinata ran a hand through her blue hair. Yasaka though looked at Naruto, who nodded, showing that she was speaking the truth, and he did indeed say that. However, I have gotten stronger. I could even lead the clan if I wanted to, having beaten my father and my sister in combat. Why aren't you then?
Huh? Hinata blinked, caught off guard by his words. I said, why aren't you? It sure is better than annoying us. He gestured to his wife and daughter with one hand. We have more important matters to handle, not to mention that village is still under attack. At least it seems so. He stared up at the sky, which cleared of any clouds. Naruto is correct. Tsunade spoke up, getting the attention of the Konoha. As shinobi, we have a duty to make sure any wounded are taken care of. Not to mention, I'm sure the other cages are required back in their village due to what is happening at the moment. She pointed at the moon. She then looked at Naruto once more. So I take it there's no possibility that you will help us? Nope. I already did more than I originally wanted, which includes talking to any of you. Here he looked at his parents, who frowned. Not to mention, he was interrupted as he felt something tugging on his sleeve. Kuno? He called his daughter's name as she was pulling on his kimono. What's wrong? Who is she, San? She's scaring me. She hid her face into his chest, similar to what she did back in the arena. She's just an annoyance. Don't worry though, as she won't do anything if she values her own life. He sent a harsh glare at the girl. Here's the thing, Hyuga. I never had nor ever will have any interest in you. While you say you're stronger, I can easily feel that you're still weak compared to Yusaka, who can wipe cities of the map. I guess one could say it would be unfair to compare you people to those back in our world, which consist of several beings many times more powerful than even myself, but that's just how it is. That's without the fact that there is no attraction between us on my side, which there apparently is for you for some reason or another. You know, polygamy isn't all that uncommon back home. For the supernatural at least, especially harems. So me getting another wife wouldn't be too weird, but for that to happen Yusaka would have to approve of said woman, and I can't think of anyone who would fit those criteria. Luckily though, there's no need for that, as I'm quite content with just her, since she can take care of any needs. A few blushes formed on the cheeks on the people there, including his own wife, whilst others Kiba were salivating at the prospect of having more than a single wife or girlfriend in general. Anyway, we really need to go, or else we'll have certain problems attempting to go back. He looked around as if searching for someone. If you see Jiraiya, tell him that I'll come for him later. He's not needed at the moment, so he can do whatever here. With that said, he placed a hand on Yusaka's shoulder before they were enveloped in a golden outline and seemingly phased out of existence. Alright. Now that's done, I want everyone— Tsunade was interrupted as something landed not too far away from the group. The dust that was thrown into the air slowly dissipated as everyone focused their attention on the person who stood there inside the crater he had caused. It was a male. Pale skin with shaggy white hair, wearing a white kimono which was open at the neck, allowing them to see several magatama tattooed around his collarbone. His eyes, which previously were closed, opened, allowing them all to see his strange-looking eyes which glowed with power. Who are you? Minato asked as he held a tri-pronged kunai in his hand ready to use in a moment's notice. I am Toneri Otsutsuki and I have come for you, Byakuganheim. His eyes locked onto the form of Hinata, who seemed to be staring at the now empty spot Naruto previously occupied. What do you mean you came here for her? Can't you see we're under attack? But of course, his eyes pulsed. I was the one who caused it after all. His revelation shocked both Konoha shinobi and the foreign cages present. What do you mean? Are you saying you're responsible for all of this? Tsunade waved her hand around. And what about the moon? I am under no obligation to answer you. I only came here to collect my bride before I can start the destruction of your world. The Raikage narrowed his eyes as electricity sparked into life around him. I see. Then you must understand we will have to stop you. Toneri scoffed. You are welcome to try. The moment he finished that sentence, he moved his head to the left. A bored expression on his face as he made eye contact with the Raikage, who seemingly teleported in front of him, eyes wide in shock due to missing his target. Fast were the thoughts going through several minds as they watched this unknown boy do something only Minato and Naruto had done before. Suddenly his hand shot out, grabbing the Raikage's outstretched fist before a green orb came into existence in his free one. Puppet. Cursing sphere. Before anyone could react, he shoved the green orb into the Raikage. The effect was instant as the man's lightning armor dissipated, his limbs losing their strength before he simply fell unconscious. He looked at the group. Leave. I have no interest in any of you aside from her. Sorry, but we can't do that. If others would hear that the Raikage was attacked and we did nothing, war would most likely break out. Something we can't afford with how tense things are at the moment. Toneri closed his eyes and sighed. Very well, know that I gave you the option. Everything all right? Yusaka asked her husband as he suddenly stopped moving. Hold on for a moment. He gently lowered Kuno on the ground before allowing a Gudadama to shimmer in existence, floating above his outstretched palm. They watched as the pure black orb slowly transformed into a spear which he grasped as he could feel chakra signatures get weaker one by one until only the one he recognized as Hinata's was left with, who he assumed was the person who was the cause for that.
Channel chakra into your ears and look away, he told Yusaka and Kuno as he cocked back his hand in which he held the spear.
Gudadama. World-piercing spear. Naruto said before he, with all of his strength, threw the spear upwards towards the moon. A loud bang was accompanied by his throw as it broke through the sound barrier. The ground ruptured behind him from the force of which he had thrown the transformed spear. He didn't even get to blink before the spear was no longer visible to his eyes. Turning around, Kuno was surprised at the destroyed ground while Yusaka followed his gaze to the moon. For a moment nothing seemed to happen, but she knew that was not true. She was proven correct, as much to her shock. Even from where they were at, she was able to see something having impacted the moon, which caused a massive explosion to happen on the celestial body. While she didn't let it know she was quite scared, yet at the same time somewhat turned on by the show of power Naruto had demonstrated, as despite the moon being much closer than it should be, it was still thousands of miles away. The strength that was needed to reach that, it was off the charts.
She gasped as particles and small rocks caused by the explosion died down. What she saw was unbelievable. A massive, gaping hole spanning miles in diameter could be seen even from where they were. Like its name suggested, the attack had pierced straight through the celestial body without any resistance and come out the other side. She looked at awe at Naruto, who seemed satisfied by his work before he wordlessly summoned their method of transport.
"Let's go," he said while Yusaka withheld a smile, knowing that he had saved them despite not saying such. "Ah, good to be back," Naruto mused as they exited the Vimana, which he called back into the vault. As they walked off, he looked around and took in the familiar smell that lingered in the air. "What about you, Kuno? Are you happy to be back as well?" he asked his daughter that was walking a few steps in front of him. To his left was Yusaka, who had her arm intertwined with his own, her head resting on his shoulder as they walked. The small blonde nodded her head. "Yes, Tusan, Kuno is very happy." She turned her head and gave them a bright smile. "Can't wait to see Shirone." Naruto chuckled softly. "Looking forward to see how Kuroka is doing. At least there's no smoke or anything in the air, which hopefully implies nothing bad has happened." He looked down to where the mop of blonde hair was resting. "What do you think, him?" Yusaka just hummed. She wasn't paying any attention to what he was saying. No, she was focused on the heat that had been developing near her loins ever since the small show of power her husband had demonstrated. Her body was mostly leaning on his as she rubbed her thighs together whilst they walked, trying to make it appear as inconspicuous as she could. "Welcome back, Naruto-sama, Yusaka-sama. You as well, Kuno-hime." They were greeted by a pair of guards who straightened themselves upon seeing them. "Had a good time?" Naruto nodded at the pair. "We did indeed, thank you for asking. Though I admit that I prefer being here, it just feels more like home. Anyway, we'd like to continue if you don't mind. While everything looks alright, you can never be too sure." "Of course." The pair bowed before them, allowing them to enter. Naruto and Yusaka sparing them a wave of their hands as they entered Kyoto. "Did you notice?" one of the guards said a few moments after they had entered. "How could I not? She was practically leaking pheromones like crazy." The other guard turned his head to look behind them. "Naruto-sama is a lucky man." The other couldn't help but nod his head in agreement. "Hello," Naruto called out as he entered their home. It was surprisingly quiet, which neither had expected. Shrugging, he took a few steps before holding his hands out just in time to catch the black blur that collided against him. "Naruto-kun nya, I missed you so much nya," came the voice of Kuroka. The girl was currently rubbing herself all over him as he just laughed while his hands rubbed her back. "Sorry, Kuroka, next time I'll take you with us if we're going somewhere, alright?" His voice was soft as he allowed her to embrace him. He felt her nod her head slightly as she enjoyed his presence. Unknown to him, Kuroka opened one of her eyes before looking straight at Yusaka, who was doing her best to hide the annoyance she felt at seeing her husband focusing his attention on someone other than her. She raised an delicate eyebrow as she locked eyes with the Nekosho before narrowing them as Kuroka flashed her with a mischievous smile. "Almost," she communicated by just looking at her. "Almost what, huh, little kitten?" Yusaka bared her teeth. Kuroka merely widened her smirk. "Say, Naruto-kun, how about we spend some time together nya? Just the two of us to make up for not bringing me with you?" Kuroka asked him somewhat sensually, enjoying the tightening of Yusaka's fist as she glared accusingly at her.
Naruto did his best to hide the shiver that went through him as he felt her hot breath on his neck, hoping Yusaka didn't took notice of it. Sure, I guess that's the least I can do to make you happy."
"Oh, thank you." She removed her head from his shoulder and kissed him on his cheek before she ran off, Naruto just stood there for a few seconds, caught off guard by the sudden gesture she made before he shook his head and brought up his hand to the spot Kuroka had kissed him, unaware of the large amount of ki Yusaka was sending his way. Naru-kun, he paled at the sweet tone of his wife as he slowly turned around, his eyes landing on the form of Yusaka, who had a dark aura surrounding her and a smile a bit too sweet for his liking. You saw I'm sorry? He lowered his head as Yusaka stalked towards him. He was surprised however as they suddenly found themselves in their bedroom. Yasa whoa. She pushed him backwards and he fell onto the bed. What is going on? Any other words he wished to say died in his throat as he lifted his head only to come face first with a perfect pair of breasts as Yusaka was straddling his waist, naked. They've gotten bigger, he noticed as he cupped her breast, giving them gentle squeezes which elicited soft, delicious-sounding whimpers from her. Naruto, her voice was soft yet seductive. Despite that though it held a threatening undertone to it which prompted him to channel his chakra to specific spots on his clothes which then disappeared. Now naked just like his wife he leaned back, holding himself up by his elbows as his eyes took in her nude form. She was still just as beautiful as the first time he had laid his eyes on her, and, to this day still the most beautiful woman he had laid his eyes on. Allowing his back to touch the mattress, his hands moved upwards, grasping her own and intertwining their fingers together. He saw her 9 fluffy blonde tails swishing in excitement behind her back. You're excited, he stated as he looked into her eyes that were clouded with lust. She purred and took pleasure into seeing him shiver. She rose slightly, just enough for one of her tails to come around and wrap itself around his stiff member. He grunted slightly at the feeling before sucking in his breath as he felt his member rub against her slick entrance. I have been, waiting for this. Yusaka hissed as she lowered herself down his member, enjoying the familiar feeling of being completely filled up by her mate. Oh, tell me more Yusaka-chan. He placed his hands on her waist and slowly massaged her thighs as she rocked her hips back and forth. I've wanted to do it the entire week, she shrieked as she felt him hit her cervix with a single, hard thrust. But couldn't with Kuno-I in the same room as us. Her hands were placed on his chest as she bounced on his lap, her fingers tracing his abs and muscles. Naruto groaned as he felt her walls hug his member tightly. Despite having given birth to their daughter, she was still pleasantly tight as she was before. He wrote it off as being a yukai thing. You should have told me, dear. I could have placed silencing seals around our bed. He began thrusting back. Each time she would lower herself he thrusted up, increasing the pleasure for both of them. He stopped before holding her sides and rolled them over so he was on top. Yusaka wasted no time as she wrapped her legs around his waist with her feet locking behind him, helping him reach in deeper. Taking a moment to look at her sweat-covered form got him excited, which she felt as his member twitched inside of her. Leaning down to share a quick kiss, he began moving in and out of her. He started off slow but quickly increased his speed as she began to let out more moans. His eyes focused on her bouncing breast which moved each time he bottomed out of her. Naruto, more please, she begged him as her tails trashed across the bed in all sorts of directions due to the pleasure she was feeling. Naruto complied as he continued pounding into the sexy vixen below him. Drops of sweat began moving down the side of his face. I am close, he grunted as he increased his pace even more. The sounds of their flesh meeting the other could be heard throughout the room. Me too, just a little bit more. She clawed at his chest, uncaring for any wounds he would get as they healed up seconds after. Fuck, coming, Naruto said before with one last thrust he buried his entire length inside of her before shooting his load right into her welcoming cervix. The feeling of his warm seed entering her womb got her over the edge as her legs tightened around his waist and her walls began to milk his length for all that it was worth. They stayed like that for a moment, both basking into the feeling of having reached their orgasm before he slowly pulled out and dropped himself down next to her. Damn, I needed that, Naruto said between heavy breaths as he stared upwards towards the ceiling. Yusaka hummed in agreement as she snuggled into him, her head resting on his chest. Me too, she began placing soft kisses on his chest before tilting her head up. You're not finished, right? His breath hitched as he felt her soft fingers wrap around his member as she slowly began to stroke him to full mast. 'Cause I'm just getting started. At that moment Naruto wasn't sure if he should praise or curse her stamina. Arg, Naruto groaned in pain as he tried to move his limbs. Weakly he looked down to where Yusaka could be seen wearing a content smile as half her body was resting on his, their legs tangled together. Are we finished? He asked cautiously. Yusaka nodded much to his relief. Yes Naruto-kun, thank you very much, she replied softly. He smiled as he trailed one of his hands up her naked back before running it through her messy blonde hair. So, what brought this on? Yusaka stiffened for a split second before answering. What do you mean? I told you, didn't I? You did, but we both know that's not the complete truth. You normally aren't so wild. Unseen to him, Yusaka frowned. While he wasn't able to see the expression she had, he could feel the shift in her mood and reacted by moving his hand from his hair towards her stomach, which he began to softly rub. There's something else, isn't it? Does it have to do with Kuroka? Yusaka turned her head so that he could see the frown she wore. Naruto, do you have any feelings for her? Please answer honestly. Taken back by her question, he was about to make some offhanded comment only to stop himself after realizing she was being serious. Yusaka, are you alright? He asked while not using any kind of suffix with her name to show he was serious. Please answer me. Her voice was soft and vulnerable, which prompted him to hold her a bit closer. Naruto closed his eyes as he thought over what he should reply. Eventually he opened them and stared her right in her eyes. Well, I guess I don't dislike her. I enjoy spending time with her. She's different, both cheer and playful. Quite flirty as well, not to mention easy on the eyes. The fact that Kuno likes playing with her younger sister is a plus as well. I see, Yusaka murmured as he finished. And what would you do if she wanted to be more than just friends? More than friends? You mean as in oh, in that way, huh? He used his free hand to scratch his cheek. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, I would ask you first, of course. We are married after all and have Kuno who comes first. Oh, is this why you are acting like this? Because you're afraid I'll leave you for someone else? Jackpot, Naruto thought as he saw her avert her gaze and chuckled. Yusaka-chan, you know I love you, right? The fact that we have Kuno is more than proof of that. And if that's not enough, the life forming inside of you right now should be. He shifted around before he was sitting with his back against the headboard and placed Yusaka in his lap. I'm not going to leave you, ever. You're the mother of my child, my wife. The first person who welcomed me in this strange new world and subsequently slept with me as well. He joked before returning to his serious persona. So please, get rid of any of those fears you have, as I will never leave you, for you have given me what I always wished for. By the end of his little speech, Yusaka had buried her face into his chest and he could feel something wet contacting him, which he realized were tears. Oh, please don't cry. He chided her as he kissed her two fox ears that sticked out between her hair. Eventually, after a few minutes, she leaned back, sniffing slightly as she flashed him a smile so radiant he would have thought the sun was shining straight into his face. Thank you. She kissed his neck on where the imprint of her teeth still rested. I needed to hear that. Before resting her head against his shoulder, both just enjoying the other's presence for the moment. Suddenly the sound of knocking on the door got both their attention before the muffled voice of their daughter could be heard. Ka-san, Tu-san, are you two here? Kuno is hungry? Both parents laughed before he grabbed the blanket lying to the side and covered both of them up. You can come in, Kuno. Slowly the door opened, allowing them to see the small stature of their daughter, whose eyes darted around their room before coming to rest as they landed on the both of them and gave a smile. So you're hungry, huh? Naruto spoke as Kuno nodded her head vehemently with puffed-out cheeks. Behind her, her small foxtail swayed from left to right as she stood there waiting while sending a pouting glare at her parents. All right, no need to glare, he said, and Kuno blushed lightly. How about you head towards the living room? I'll join you soon while Yusaka will prepare us some food, okay? Okay, Kuno spoke cheerfully, a complete 180 compared to before as she turned around and ran out of the room. So much energy. Guess I should start teaching her more. Just small things that'll help when we'll get to the more tougher stuff as she grows older. He added quickly upon seeing the glare Yusaka sent him at the prospect of Naruto training their daughter to the ground. Hello everyone. Yusaka greeted as she walked into the living room where Kuno was along with Kuroka and her younger sister, Naruto following her closely behind. They returned her greeting while Kuno ran up to Naruto, who scooped her up in his arms, enjoying her laughter as he twirled her around. Stopping, he walked past Yusaka, pecking her on the cheek before plopping himself down on the couch Kuroka was sitting on as well. Now that we're all here, I will prepare us dinner, okay? Yusaka asked and was met with nods of everyone present and smiled. Good. By the way, Kuroka, the black-haired Nekosho, looked at the kitsune with a confused expression on her face, prompting her to continue. After dinner I would like to speak with you. In private. Kuroka looked at her for a moment before she slowly nodded her head. Great, well, I'll be off then. As she left, Kuroka turned to Naruto and tilted her head. He shrugged his shoulders. I dunno, was all he said, though he actually had an inkling about what she wanted to talk to her about. Without saying a word, Kuno hopped off his lap in favor for kneeling on the ground next to Sharon, who was busy drawing something he wasn't quite able to make out from where he was sitting. Kuroka didn't waste any time, as barely seconds later she had thrown herself onto him, her head resting on his lap with a pleased smile on her face. Despite being caught off guard by her sudden movement, he quickly recollected himself and soon began running a hand through her long black tresses while scratching her ears with his fingers, making her purr softly in response. "Say, Kuroka," Naruto suddenly spoke, getting a soft hum from her. "Did anything happen while we were gone? Like any visitors or whatever?" Yes," she hissed as she felt him scratch an erogenous zone all Neko shoes had around her ears. "Apparently you have an appointment with Azazel soon, Nya. I'm not sure what it is about, but I overheard it has to do with sanction regarding Fallen and Kyoto, Nya. She gave a shrug before nuzzling her head against his hand. "Other than that, somebody else came by, a devil." Naruto halted his petting for a moment before continuing like nothing had happened. "A devil, you say? Can you tell me some more, as the barrier should keep them out?" Well, he actually just knocked on the door but left after I told him you weren't here." "What did he look like?" "Long black hair done in a ponytail, black eyes with these tear troughs. He was a bit shorter than you, and that's all I can really remember, Nya. "Ah, him again, huh? Still need to figure out how he can enter here unnoticed." "You know him?" he hummed. "Yes, I do. He's alright. He's in Sears's peerage as a bishop. Don't worry though, as he doesn't really care about who you are," he said upon noticing her stiffen at the mention of the current Lucifer. "Not that he has any right to, regardless, not after what he did." Moving away from his hand, Kuroka shifted around so she was now facing him. "What did he do, Nya?" "Something very similar to what you did." Her eyes widened. "Except it was more extreme. He had killed his entire clan, leaving only his younger brother behind before being written off as a criminal." He raised his hand to stop her from talking. "The reason he did that was because his clan was planning a coup to overthrow the village they lived in. He was given the choice of killing off his clan and thereby leaving his younger brother as the only survivor, or go against them and then they would all be killed, his younger brother not excluded." "Wow," she murmured. "But what about the children, Nya? Were they killed as well?" She gulped as she saw him nod. "Yes. Parents, children of any age alongside their grandparents, none were spared sans his younger brother. It's quite sad, as he had practically committed genocide against his own kin, saving his younger brother only for the same brother to be his murderer. Well, not technically, but Naruto wasn't aware of that." Neither said anything as he finished the story. The only sound in the room came from the pencils running over paper belonging to Kuno and Sharon. The gloomy mood that reigned them was broken by Yasaka's voice, telling them that dinner was finished. Kuno and Sharon both made haste towards the kitchen, while Kuroka took a bit longer as she removed herself from him, flashing him with her body as she winked upon noticing his eyes lingering on her. Before he could say anything, she too headed towards the source of the delicious smell that invaded their senses, laughing softly as she walked, knowing that he was watching her, and added a sway in her steps. Sitting in a dark room in a location nobody aside from himself knew of was Sasuke. His Sharingan was activated as he stared intently at the wall in front of him. The slight twitch of his eye was all that showed that he was aware of the newcomer that phased into existence next to him, floating in the air. "Office." Sasuke greeted the dragon, who held the form of a young girl. "Uchiha Sasuke." Office returned the greeting before joining him in staring at the barely visible wall. Eventually, though, Office slowly turned her head towards the Uchiha, who paid her no mind. "It's time." "HN." Sasuke grunted before he stood up. "Let me grab some stuff I want to bring with me." He didn't bother waiting for a reply as he stood up before walking away and entering a different room. A couple minutes later, he returned, this time holding a rolled-up scroll in his hands, while he was now wearing a cloak over his previous outfit. "You know," Office spoke, "the person you're looking for was here, in this world, not too long ago." That information got his attention as he turned to her. "What do you mean?" "Exactly like I said. Uzumaki Naruto was here. I saw him myself. His powers truly are something to behold." She recalled, having seen the strange attack he had used, which managed to tear a hole through the moon. Despite not showing it, she took note of the clenching of his fist at what he thought was praise, like she was comparing Naruto to him. Sasuke sneered. "Tell me, why don't you get Naruto in this little club of yours? You said it yourself that I'm stronger than most that have joined you, which implies that he is too." "I have tried," she revealed. "Ever since I first felt him arrive, I tried to get a hold of him. Somehow, though, he managed to evade me until I finally managed to pinpoint his location. Unfortunately, by then I was already too late. A large part of the hate and anger inside him was quelled." He also had other responsibilities, ones that would make sure he wouldn't cooperate with me. And while I could force him to join, it would do me no good, so I took my losses and left him alone.
And that's when you found me. Correct. You're the biggest source of power I can sense in this world. With the exception of those large creatures I came across. But they are no use to me, unlike you, who will be my second in command. Second in command? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, once you join you will be the strongest after me. The others don't stand a chance against you, that I can already tell. Your energy is cold yet vast. Much more than even devils have. A portal then formed in front of him. Let's go, I will explain more about the world once we get there. Sasuke gave the portal a wary glance before his eyes flicked to the small girl. Despite having told those from Konoha he would help them during their small run-in last time, he only said so as he wanted to find Naruto. Now that someone else was offering him that he had no need to travel back to that accursed village that had done so much against his clan, he was secretly quite happy about it. He also knew that this girl, Ophis, was not someone he wanted as an enemy. His mind reflected to the first time she had appeared before him. Back then she had almost forced him to kneel without any visible difficulty. She truly did live up to her title of infinite. So, with a casual shrug of his shoulder he stepped inside, Ophis following behind as the portal closed behind him. Leaving behind his hideout where he had spent the past few years behind to be consumed by nature itself. Come on Kuno, Naruto whined as his daughter laughed at him while ducking under another attempt to catch her. The two had been at it for the past few minutes, playing a game of tag with him being it. Smirking slightly, eyes twinkling with mischief, without giving a warning he allowed Kurama's chakra arms to fly out of his body. Unprepared, Kuno could only widen her eyes as the limb wrapped around her and brought into his waiting arms. A large smile on his face as she pouted at him. Mo, that's cheating, she accused him. Cheating? Naruto repeated as if the suggestion itself was ridiculous. My dear Kuno, there were never any rules which stated I couldn't use Kurama, was there? Kuno opened her mouth to rebuke his statement, only to pause as he was right, so instead she settled for brooding. More laughter escaped his lips as he was reminded of someone else who was a brooder. Suddenly his head snapped into a certain direction, eyes narrowing as he seemed to be staring at a wall. This chakra, he knew, there was only one person aside from him with chakra this potent alive. So you have finally come, huh, Sasuke? He mused internally with a thoughtful expression on his face. Wonder if I should let Itachi know. Yelping lightly he looked down to see Kuno looking at him in concern while she was busy pinching his cheek. Are you okay too, San? Naruto shook his head before flashing her a smile. Of course Kuno-chan, now please let go of my cheek. Much to his disbelief the young fox girl seemed to be thinking about if before she shook his head. No. He looked at to see she was being serious. I see. And before she knew it he had thrown her on the couch before joining her as he began to tickle her sides, gaining boisterous laughter from her. Bahahaha. Please to San. I give. Naruto ignored her pleas as he focused on her sensitive spots which were very similar to Yasaka's own. Eventually he did stop, leaving a red-faced Kuno who was breathing heavily as she wiped away the tears that had threatened to fall. Where is Ka-san? Kuno asked after regaining her breath. Oh, she's currently busy talking with Kuroka about important matters, he told her before grabbing the remote and turning on the television. Accepting his answer, Kuno climbed into his lap as they began watching some anime that was currently on. Please take a seat, Yasaka said kindly as she gestured to the chair that was on the opposite side of the desk she was sitting behind. The two were currently in her office where she had brought her to once they had eaten dinner. Glancing around, Kuroka nervously shuffled over before she sat down, one leg neatly crossed over the other, moving her kimono around to make sure not to expose too much skin. So, what do you want to speak to me about, Nya? Kuroka started as she tilted her head questioningly. Yasaka said nothing for a moment. Instead she focused on the Nekosho sitting in front of her, idly taking notice of the fact that she was nervous as she played with her kimono as means of distraction. Deciding it would be best if she would be straightforward, she spoke. Are you interested in my husband? Amusement shone in her eyes as she watched Kuroka almost fall off of the chair, wide eyes looking at her in disbelief from how blunt she was. Nya? Kuroka exclaimed in shock as she collected herself from the bluntness of her question. I asked if you are romantically interested in my husband. I do, Nya. Kuroka answered softly as she averted her gaze. Like she was ashamed of admitting she had feelings for the blonde man who had came into her life. Why? Her question got her to look back at her. Why do you have these feelings for him? Kuroka frowned. I don't know.
I honestly didn't expect it either, but it just happened. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that he's the first man to treat me so well. As you know, I used to serve under a devil. She spit out the word like it was some sort of venom. He, along with other males in his peerage, weren't the kind of people I liked to spend time with or even be in the same room as. They treated me like dirt, and I only stayed and so I could take care of Sharon. Then that happened and I ran away to here where I met both you and your husband. He's different. He doesn't look down with me or glance at me with disdain, like I'm some sort of slut for him to relieve himself with. He treats me like a normal being, like a woman. She looked at Yusaka with a gentle smile. That's when I started to gain some sort of feelings for him, yet I didn't know what it was at the time. These feelings grew over time, especially when he defended me from those devils that came and wanted to take me. When he promised me he would protect me, protect us. A faint blush lingered her cheeks as she remembered that moment. I didn't try anything at the time since I knew you two were married and unfortunately you are stronger than me. She seemed to pout at that. But that didn't stop me from attempting to seduce him. Getting him to give in first, but that turned out harder than I thought. No matter what I tried, he never gave the reaction I wished for. It's like he's not even attracted to me, to this. She ran her hands over her body. Kuroka knew she was beautiful, having several men come her way only for her to send them back. She had her sights set on Naruto and nobody else. Yusaka had her eyes closed as she listened to Kuroka speak. Throughout their conversation she noticed she never added her verbal tick, which showed that she was serious and speaking from her heart. Opening her eyes, Yusaka stared right into similar ones, having come to a decision. I can tell that you're being honest in your words. Having said that, I will allow you to court my husband. The happiness she saw in Kuroka's eyes was something to behold. However, know that I am the alpha woman between the two of us. Why? Because me and Naruto-kun already have a child with another one coming along. I also won't allow anyone else to join in. This should make those old goats from the council happy. She huffed out in annoyance. What do you mean NYA? You know Naruto-kun is very powerful, correct? Not to forget that he has all these powerful and weird abilities too. Well, the council have been attempting for Naruto to take another wife or anything really, as children from him will no doubt turn out very powerful. Kuno is a prime example of this. She's still young but already has very large reserves for her age, along with a bloodline limit that originates from his clan that is able to suppress another being's power, regardless of their alignment. An ability that is very useful regardless of who it has. Kuroka nodded her head, having seen those chains firsthand. As you can see, those from the council want him to have more children to make our faction more powerful. Something that I don't like, not to mention that Naruto-kun is powerful enough to keep threats away, which you saw as he made the devils return to the underworld when they came here to collect you. I'm sure if it was up to them they would have started breeding him, if not for the fact that nobody can touch him. Anyway, let's go back and bring him the news. You and your sister might as well start living here, as it would be easier for both parties. As both stood up, Kuroka moved towards the foxwoman and pulled her into a hug, careful not to do anything that can harm her. Thank you, NYA, she mumbled into her neck as she was shorter a bit than her. It's all right. She petted her head. Now, how about you go while I'll take care of a couple things here before joining you? Kuroka gave her a nod before she turned around and exited the office, not before sparing her another glance. She walked quickly through the hallways to where she could sense Naruto was at. Entering the living room, she saw him slumped on the couch, one arm wrapped around Kuno, who was snoring softly. It made for quite a cute sight. Shaking her head slightly, she cleared her throat as she walked up to him. Naruto turned his head at the sound, only for his eyes to widen as a pair of lips claimed his own. Due to the shock of the sudden action, Kuroka had free rein and put her tongue to use, roaming his mouth for a good minute or so before disengaging from the kiss, a trail of saliva connecting them. That was my first kiss, NYA. She spoke flustered, panting heavily at how intense it was. Naruto blinked as he looked her over before smiling. I take it Yusaka is okay with this? Kuroka nodded with a bright smile before sitting down to the side of him and leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She's fine with this, NYA. Though I'm not sure if she's doing it for me or to get the council off her back, I don't care. Naruto turned his head slightly before kissing one of her ears. Don't worry, if Yusaka really didn't want this she would have said so, trust me. Kuroka didn't reply. Instead she closed her eyes, enjoying the sensation she felt from being close to him. This was the start of a new chapter in her life, one she knew she was going to enjoy. A yawning Naruto could be seen dragging his feet behind as he slowly made his way to the living room. Morning, Yusaka-chan, Kuno-chan. He greeted the two blonde kitsunes with a tired smile whom were already there. Both woman and child turned towards him. The latter gave him a happy wave before her attention returned to the television both were watching while the former looked concerned at his tired form.
Naruto-kun, are you alright? Naruto gave a weak smile as he slowly made his way over to where she was and slowly sat down next to her. Yeah, I'm just tired you know, especially with you two these past few days. Yusaka had the decency to blush as she understood what he was implying. Kuroka had wasted no time in bedding Naruto the same day she included her in their small family. Unfortunately or fortunate depending on the person, she had somewhat of a competitive side to her. She wasn't even aware of herself. So when he had literally fucked Kuroka into slumber, Yusaka had pretty much barged in before dragging him into their shared room while telling him that it was her turn. And Naruto being himself couldn't say no to his loving wife. While in the beginning it wasn't a problem as he had more than enough stamina to sat both of their needs, Kuroka became somewhat of a sex demon after her first time. Having to satisfy both of the women, both having more stamina than a normal person, was able to tire even him out. Yusaka was brought out of her thoughts as she felt her husband wrap an arm around her and pull her closer. She didn't fight it as she lovingly rested her head in the crook of his neck. She smiled as she watched one of his hands slowly make their way to her stomach before he began to softly rub the place where new life was currently forming. Just a few more months, Naruto said softly and felt Yusaka nod her head. She purred softly as Naruto began to place soft kisses along her neck before burying his face in her hair and inhaling her scent. The couple stayed like that for several minutes, both just basking in the other's presence while Kuno was off in her own world as her eyes were glued to the television screen. "Hey Yusaka," Yusaka hummed for him to continue while continuing to nuzzle him with her hair. "Where is Kuroka? I can't sense her anywhere near." "Kuroka, she's currently handling an assignment with the Neko shoes I gave her. She should be back whenever she's done, and Kaneko is currently attending school." Naruto nodded his head and noticed Kuno scrunch her face up at the mention of school. Cheeky little kitsune she is, but he didn't comment and allowed her to keep watching television. "By the way, don't we have that appointment with Azazel today?" He suppressed his urge to chuckle as Yusaka let out an annoyed sigh. "Guess I was correct. Nonetheless, as much as we both want to, we can't miss out appointment. If we're lucky it'll be done within a few minutes if it's regarding Kyoto. We both saw an increase in tourism once we barred fallen angels from entering. That's not even mentioning that money in general is the least of our worries." "That's correct Naruto-kun," she mumbled before letting out a soft whine which turned into a slight squeal as Naruto removed his arm from around her before picking her up and placing her in his lap. My Yusaka-chan, never thought you'd squeal for something like that. And we're not even in bed either." Yusaka's cheeks flushed in embarrassment as she nudged him with an elbow. Naruto no baka." She pouted, and this time Naruto couldn't keep his laughter to himself. This of course got Kunu's attention, who began to laugh with him, though she had no idea why other than that his laughter was infectious. Yusaka huffed and buried her face against his chest as they kept on laughing at her. After a while, and once the laughter had died down, Yusaka got off of his lap, earning a raised eyebrow from Naruto, who looked curiously at her. "I'm going to prepare us some food, my dear. Kuno and I have been waiting for you to show up for a while now." She sent him a playful yet accusing glare that had him chuckle awkwardly. Something that only increased as Kuno glared at him as well. "Kuno?" he exclaimed in shock at her glare. "How could you betray your father like this?" He held his hand on his chest where his heart lay. As Kuno kept up her glare, Naruto allowed his body to fall, only to catch her off guard as just before he made impact with the couch he launched himself towards her, whose glare turned into a look of shock. Kuno had no time to even open her mouth as before she realized it, Naruto was already on her. His body smothering her own, though he made sure not to hurt her. Just enough so she couldn't move, with him holding her in place. "Now Kuno, what have we learned?" he asked somewhat mockingly as he glanced down at his daughter, whose golden eyes were narrowed slightly as she attempted to wiggle from underneath him. Naruto shook his head. "Nah, that's not going to work, lil one." Despite his words, she continued her futile attempts at removing herself before settling on a pout once she realized he was right. Oh, it seems you understand it now." Kuno nodded her head, pout still in place. Looking at her for a few moments, Naruto couldn't help himself as he leaned down and kissed her on her cheek before he began tickling her. Yusaka watched from where she was standing as father and daughter were playing with another. A soft smile gracing her face before she turned around and silently walked out of the room, leaving those two alone. "So, what did we learn?" Naruto asked Kuno, whose face was red from the tickles she had endured not even a minute ago. Kuno mumbled something incoherently as Naruto started playing with her tails. "I'm sorry, what was that? Do you want me to continue where I left off?" "No," she shook her head from left to right. "I learned not to laugh at Tu-san or Ka-san."
Good. He softly petted her head before he easily lifted her in his arms and turned her around so she was now facing him. Naruto smiled at her tilted head whilst her tail swayed behind her lazily. She still looked as cute and adorable as ever. He and Yusaka had noticed she grew very slowly, though Yusaka assured them that it was normal with kitsunes, as she herself hadn't looked like her age till she reached her late teens. Apparently Nekoshu's had those issues as well, and Kuroka was an early bloomer by their standard. Not that he cared though, as he enjoyed being able to so easily lift Kuno in his arms and hold her. The more he looked at her, the more curious he got, as he could envision Yusaka as a chibi version of herself. Though, she would probably look like Kuno did now if the countless times they would compare mother and daughter with another had was any indication. As he was deep in, though, he had unconsciously placed her on his lap and started running his fingers through her hair. Feeling something nudge him, he slowly looked down to see Kuno waving one of her hands in front of his face. Seeing she got her father's attention, she retracted her limb before pointing towards the kitchen. Ka-san called for us as she finished preparing food. Naruto's eyes lit up, and before she realized it, they were no longer sitting on the couch. Instead, she was in his arms as he made his way to the source of the delicious smell of food. Sasuke let out a deep sigh as he finished reading another book regarding the history of the world he was currently in. Office had given him a quick rundown on how this world worked before sending him off to what appeared to be a massive library and telling him to get up to date and ask questions later. Sasuke thought about protesting and wanting to ask where Naruto was located, but stopped himself as he didn't want to upset the dragon god, especially after knowing the difference in power between them. So far he had learned that this world was far from normal, even when compared to his home. While regular humans or civilians, if you want to call them, were weaker than those back home, where even those could use chakra. There were beings here that would and could make chunin shinobi look like civilians in comparison. Devils, angels, fallen angels, yokai and more. The world was filled with supernatural, as they were called. Each of them capable of living for several centuries if not millennia. Orochimaru would have a field day if he would be able to get his hands on one of them. Especially with the man's obsession for immortality. Unfortunately for him, but fortunate for many others, the snake's dead. Even gods and goddesses were real, he learned. He was mainly interested in Shinto gods as their names were connected to Mangekyo Sharingan techniques. Aside from those, Indra interested him as well, even more after learning said god was one of the strongest beings. Setting the closed book aside, Sasuke stood up before making his way to where Office told him she would be. Sasuke entered an empty room and spotted Office floating in the air, her emotionless gaze resting on one of the walls before her. Her gaze shifted from the wall towards Sasuke upon noticing his arrival and slightly turned her body. I take it you are done? Sasuke nodded. Yes, I've read up on the important parts from history to whatever factions are around. Good. So I take it you have any questions? I do, but it has nothing to do with what I just read. I see. It's about Naruto, correct? The person you're looking for? Sasuke nodded once more. There's not much to say really. Like I told you, I tried to contact him before you but was unable to. I don't know what he's up to, as I don't care much for those that have no interest in furthering my own goals. I understand that, but where do I find him? Office stayed silent for a moment and Sasuke wondered if he asked something wrong. Before he could muse further on that, she replied. Kyoto. Kyoto? Sasuke repeated. As in the city home to yokai? That is correct. The leader is Yusaka, a Kyuubi yokai and one of the most powerful yokai alive. So that's who I should go to for answers? No, Sasuke blinked at the reply given and looked at her for clarification. If you were to go to Kyoto and demand or threaten Yusaka for answers on Naruto, you will lose. You will either die or make it out alive with my help, but that would reveal myself to the world. What do you mean? Sasuke asked, slightly annoyed. Didn't you tell me I'm stronger than her? You said she's ultimate class at best, whereas I'm around upper Satan class. Sasuke said, using devil terms to determine one's power. It should be no contest. True, you are stronger than her. However, it is not she you should worry about. Sasuke raised his eyebrow as Office continued. While Yusaka is ultimate class, it is her husband you should worry about. His power is greater than any devil alive, even Searsex. Who is he? Who he is? He is the person I first searched for, who I unfortunately couldn't align myself with. He is the person you are looking for, Uzumaki Naruto. Silence. Silence reigned the room as Sasuke allowed his eyes to widen at what he was just told. Naruto is married? To the yokai leader, a Kyuubi? His surprise quickly morphed into anger as he realized Office implied Naruto was stronger than him, even with the constant training he had done for the past few years. But how? They were equal until he revealed those strange abilities.
Did those really make such a difference? Ophis, you said you are a being who's been here from the beginning. A claim such as that one implies you have knowledge only a few beings must have. Can you tell me about Uzumaki's abilities? You mean the Gate of Babylon? Sasuke nodded. Yes, nobody knows what they exactly do or where it originates from. Perhaps if I know more about it I can counter it, as without it I stand a chance. Very well. His ability, the Gate of Babylon, originates from his ancestor Gilgamesh of Uruk. He was born from a union between a king and a goddess born several millennia before the birth of Christ. He was 2/3 god and 1/3 human, an ultimate, divine being with no equal. King of Heroes was his title, for he is mankind's oldest hero. He's said to be the origin of all myths and legends people sprout about these days. The Gate of Babylon, you can say that it's a vault. A vault he had built to store all the treasure he had collected over his life. The Gate of Babylon allows the owner direct access to it using spatial manipulation. Inside of that vault is said to be every weapon known to man. I tried to search for it once in the past, but even I was unable to locate where it is at. You must know Uchiha Sasuke. That his vault holds weapons capable of destroying the world if he would wish so. I assure you that if the location of the vault would ever become known, war will be held for the knowledge. That's just how dangerous some of those weapons are if they were to fall in the wrong hands. There's not much more I can say other than that even true Longinus, the spear that pierced Christ, is child's play compared to some of the treasures stored deep within that vault. I don't know how Uzumaki is capable of using the vault other than him being a descendant of the Gilgamesh himself. Something very probable given that they look near identical if one were to compare the two. Though that raises even more questions that are left unanswered. All I say is that you should not attempt to fight Naruto as you are now. He is already labeled as strongest human amongst both devils and fallen and seen as an unknown within the two factions. But as long as you don't threaten his wife or daughter, you should be fine. Having said her thing, Ophis phased out of existence, leaving Sasuke to ponder over what he was just told. Hold on, Sasuke blinked in shock. Daughter? Hearing that Naruto had a wife was already a big shock, but to hear he also has a daughter, a person to continue his legacy should he die, was shocking to say the least. He never expected Naruto, at least with how he acted the last time he had seen him, to be married, as he couldn't see anyone who could stand his arrogance. Well, Hinata might, but that girl has some screws loose in that head of hers. Even he stayed far away from her. It only made him want to go to Kyoto even more just to see who this Yasaka was that could stand Naruto's pompous attitude that made his younger self appear as a saint. Still, he would need to become even more powerful in order to fight his childhood friend, which was disheartening after the constant training he underwent. He never would have expected for Naruto to gain such a massive power-up. Well, it was more so hiding, as he told everyone he unlocked it during the time he was gone with Jiraiya. Regardless, Sasuke stifled a yawn. He could ask her later more about it and ask Ophis for training. For now he'd like a bed to sleep in, as he had been awake for far too long. A door slowly opened as Naruto, with Yasaka next to him, entered. Already inside was Azazel, sitting on the chair assigned for him. As he turned around upon hearing the door opening, Naruto noticed the man's eyebrows shooting upwards as his gaze rested on Yasaka's pregnant stomach before moving upwards and making eye contact with both of them. Neither said a thing but did return his gaze before they moved to the other side of the desk Azazel was sitting in front. Naruto pulled the chair back for Yasaka, gaining a soft thank you in return before he took his seat next to her. So, you called for this meeting? Yasaka began, breaking the silence that reigned the room. Taking that as his sign to speak, Azazel did. Correct, Naruto Dono, Yasaka Dono. I called for this meeting to discuss the situation regarding my faction in Kyoto. Mainly certain rules you've imposed on us and if it's eligible for a change. He explained while using the suffix as a sign of respect. Yes, that's what you wrote in the message sent to us. The question is though, why should we change anything? Ever since the ban was implemented, we've seen an increase in tourism and less complaints from guests and residents alike. People love it here and women no longer have to worry about unwanted advances or comments coming from your faction. Azazel stayed silent as Yasaka continued talking. As much as he wanted to defend his men, he knew when and where to do so. He knew his men weren't the greatest out there, evident that they're no longer angels and therefore have committed sins. But still, Kyoto was one of the best places in Japan for them to relax. To remove stress of his men, as it had everything from cute girls to clubs to let loose, so to speak. Honestly, Azazel Dono, both Naruto-kun and I see no good reason to allow them back. Unless you can guarantee that they are capable of behaving properly, which I doubt you can. Don't feel too bad though, as devils might soon follow your footsteps as they've gotten a bit more daring in the past few months with their attempts of forcing yokai in their peerage.
Yasaka scowled at the memories of seeing her kind almost being forced into servitude. In her territory no less. So Azazel-san, can you promise us that none of your men will do anything other than behave? Azazel shook his head at Yasaka's question. He couldn't. As much as he wanted to, and no matter how hard he tried, he just could not promise her that. It was just not within his abilities, and he knew that his men would no doubt end up doing something which will end up displeasing Yasaka and even worse Naruto. Even now he could see the impact of him being here with them had on her. The confidence Yasaka showed was all because of him. She knew that he wouldn't dare to threaten her with him there as he was stronger than him. Something he knew as well after reports came to him from his and Sirzek's small altercation. Azazel himself was weaker than Sirzek's, and reports said Naruto was said to be on par or perhaps even stronger than the Super Devil. Speculations based on how uncaring he was when he had spoken with the man and the lack of respect he had shown. So with that in mind, Azazel knew that the man sitting in front of him was out of his league. Him being human was even better, as light magic had no negative effects on him like it would on devils. All those things made him even more curious on just how someone like him was kept unknown to the supernatural for so long. After the first time they had met, which was where he was revealed to be Yasaka's husband, Azazel had sent most of his men to search for more information about him. They came up with nothing except small reports of him being spotted in several parts of the world a few years ago. All in all, he didn't seem to exist before that. Uzumaki Naruto was still an enigma, both for the fallen angels and devils, as a human with his powers was unheard of. Even those with Longinus sacred gears have never reached anything close to his power, which made him all the more intriguing for someone like him. He was a puzzle without any pieces to put together, and he could only wait until Michael would take notice of him. No, Azazel was sure he already knew of him, as the man had quite the network of contacts scattered around the globe. A network surpassing even his own. So there's no chance of you allowing my people back here? He asked, though he already knew the answer. No, it was Naruto that spoke up. If you can't promise that, then there's no chance in hell they're allowed back here. Especially with Yasaka being pregnant. I wouldn't put it past one of them to try and harm her, and if that were to happen I would come after you, and I promise you now that you do not want that. Azazel involuntarily shivered both at the threat and the cold tone as was served. A look in his blood-red eyes was enough to show that his life was likely forfeit if one of his men truly did mess up, and he kind of enjoyed living. Very well, if that's your answer, then we are done here, Azazel said with a heavy sigh as he stood up, Yasaka and Naruto mimicking his movement. The couple lead Azazel out of the building before sending someone with him to the exit of Kyoto. That went better than I expected. Yasaka mused as she had her eyes closed and a small smile on her face as Naruto was hugging her close to him. They were currently sitting in the living room, Yasaka on his lap. Really, it went much like I expected it to go. Yasaka raised an eyebrow. Well, I expected for him to argue more, you know, put a bit more effort into it, but it seemed that he already knew what our answer was going to be. Naruto hummed. Yay, he seemed to be expecting it. Though I'm sure he also knew that his life was on risk with my last threat. Those fallen would probably do anything to you just to spite him, and he's aware of it. Meow. Both Naruto and Yasaka turned and looked to their left, where a small black cat was sitting next to them. The cat's hazel eyes looked between the two before it slowly walked over to Naruto and climbed on his shoulder. Hello, Kuroka. He greeted her, who responded by rubbing her cheek against his. Hello, Nya. I take it Yasaka's assignment is finished? It is, Nya. I will have a report presented to you tomorrow morning. Yasaka nodded. That's fine. Did you run into any problems while you were there? The cat shook her head. Nope, everything went well, which is why I'm back so early. Nya. Is Sharon still in school? Yay, but she should be finished soon. He glanced at the clock that was hanging on the wall. Yes, soon. Are you going to pick her up? Kuroka nodded. Good, Kuno will be happy to see her back, as I doubt Kurama will be able to survive for much longer. The trio chuckled at that, as they could already imagine it happening. Naruto had introduced Kurama to both Sharon and Kuroka, first in his small form, and later when they were somewhere safe he allowed him his full power. To say they were shocked would be an understatement. Never had either of them seen anything as large as Kurama was. Even Yasaka in her transformed state was several feet smaller than him. Though they had a good laugh when Sharon made a comment about his long ears, comparing them to a rabbit. While Naruto managed to stop him from doing anything to harm them, Kuroka and her younger sister learned that day that anything regarding his ears were not up for any sort of talk. A glow encompassed Kuroka before it was gone, and in place of the cat she was now in her human form. Though she wore no clothes, neither Yasaka or Naruto cared much, as both had seen her without them and Kuno wasn't in the room with them. Leaning over, she kissed Naruto on his cheek before standing up. I'm going to pick Sharon up,
Later NYA, she said as she walked over to her room in order to wear something. That girl, Yusaka said as they watched her skip out of the room. Ah, relax Yusaka-chan, let her be. He chided her as he petted her head. She pouted for a moment before Naruto turned her around and locked his lips with hers. Her eyes fluttered close as her hands moved upwards and her fingers began to run through his blonde locks. While her hands were playing with his hair, his were moving downwards before stopping on her rear, which he proceeded to give a good squeeze and getting a soft moan from the blonde kitsune. She broke the kisses half-lidded, lust-filled eyes stared at him and uttered one word, bedroom. Naruto wasted no time as with a simple shunshin both of them were gone, leaving the living room empty. He made sure to send Kurama a mental notice that he and Yusaka were busy in case someone asked where they were. The end.